in 3, 2, 1, and let's go.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 20 of the Branding Beardos. It's Big John and Kenneth bringing you perspectives that inspire the next great Asian brand. And thank you to everyone for your support, your eyes and ears. Today's guest has done so much that we can multi-hyphenate the title that goes under his name. And it would take one whole episode just to talk about all his credentials alone. He's an engineer, a professor, a climate activist, and now a startup founder. This inventive creator led the development of the world's first sheep-shearing robot at the University of Western Australia in 1979 and continued to develop robotics in this area before leading another team to create Australia's tele-robot on the web, a tele-operated industrial robot which was one of the earliest demonstration of the Internet of Things. Now, for his contributions to the industry, he received the prestigious Engineers Australia Medal in 2019 for his meritorious service. He is also author of the book, The Making of an Expert Engineer. Now, thank goodness he has time for us because he's really a busy man. Now, today he's on a mission to bring, an energy-efficient, eco-friendly cooling solution called Close Comfort to our rapidly warming world. Ladies and gentlebeards, please welcome inventor and CEO of Close Comfort, Professor James Trevelyan.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, James.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening. I watched your TED Talk in preparation for this podcast. I'm like, wow, because we normally try to kind of size up our guests to see who they really are, and I'm like, this is not just a man who just invented another way of having an air conditioning. This is a man on a mission. Now, maybe first things first, let's talk a little bit about this Close Comfort. What made you decide one day that you needed to bring this to the world?
Well, it was about 2:00 in the morning in Islamabad in the month of June, and the indoor temperature was reaching for 40 degrees because there was a power cut and the air conditioner had thudded to a halt. Dead silence, total darkness, the ceiling fan running to a halt, and I could hear the mosquitoes lining up for their bombing run. Sweat was running down my nose, and I thought, oh my goodness me, there's got to be a better way to keep cool. And it has to run on a battery. So, of course, at the time, you couldn't imagine an air conditioner running on a battery. So because of the routine power cuts that had started then in Pakistan, people have these UPS supplies initially to keep the computers running. Because, of course, in those days, you'd lose everything on your computer if the power, even a tiny glitch. No. But, people then realized, well, you could run the TV and not miss the drama that everybody else was talking about. So, yeah, these things became ubiquitous. And I thought, I wonder if you could just get enough cool air just to sort of keep the sweat from your nose and just a breath of fresh air through those power cuts, it just might work. But it took an awful long time to make it work.
Wow. What a story. What a story. And I mean, like, talking about that, right? Singapore is kind of like the air-conditioned nation. We have a moniker that's been trotted out, almost as a joke.
It's like the capital of air conditioning.
Yes, this is the best place. If you're an air conditioning maker, this is the best place to sell it.
Well, I hate air conditioning in Singapore because I have to wear a coat like this and a hat.
Exactly. And the thing is that
have you seen what I'm wearing? I have a sweater on and a cap.
Yes.
And the thing is that, like, for Singaporeans, right, we are so used to it that we don't even think about what we are doing. Sometimes we just turn on the aircon, bring it down all the way to the coolest. Yeah. But like, for those of us, for all the viewers who aren't aware, what is the scale of energy that we are using with all this traditional air conditioning? How is it hurting us beside the $300 bills?
Which I actually got mine. I was just sharing with Kenneth earlier that I got my electricity bill today. I was like, oh, how apt. We're talking to the professor here, and my bill came in at over $300. Most of it went into air conditioning.
I've learned how Singaporeans survive. You go to the office Monday to Friday, and then you go to the malls on Saturday and Sunday. But with the virus, of course, you've had to be stuck at home, and we did really well because all of a sudden people realized what it was going to cost to sit at home in air-conditioned comfort.
Wow.
And our little air conditioners use so little electricity. So yeah, really attractive. We've sold really well. But seriously, you're asking the question. There's only 5 million or so. Was it 5 or 6 million in Singapore?
Yeah.
5.5.
Not very far away. You've got about 3 billion people who need air conditioning. So imagine, I mean, the planet just doesn't have the energy needed to run air conditioners for all these people. And at the moment, you've got hundreds of millions, billions of people who are struggling to sleep for 5, 6, 7 months of the year because they don't have air conditioning. No wonder they don't do much. And you think back, your great Premier Lee Kuan Yew, he saw what air conditioning would do to Singapore in terms of productivity, prosperity, just the ability to work through the heat. And imagine if we were able to do that through the rest of the planet, what a transformation it would make. So that's my dream, but we can't do it in a way which will literally roast the climate. That's what'll happen if we go on the way we are.
But why specifically like air conditioning? Because I know, in some parts of the world, there's no clean water, there's not enough electricity for light. So what made you just center on, okay, I need to fix this air conditioning problem? Because there are other things. So air conditioning is one of those things that is quite specific.
Look, it was being there, right? My wife is from Pakistan, my dear wife, and she has a fabulous family there. So I wanted to spend time there, and I wanted it to be comfortable. And so with 40-degree heat, we have this bed tent that intensifies the cooling, keeps out the mosquitoes. That was another vital component. And so the real challenge, because she's a very, very, fussy person. She's also claustrophobic. And when she first saw the tent, she said, I'm not sleeping in that thing ever. Remove it. Get it away from the bed. I'm claustrophobic. I said, just try it. Just try it one night, 1 hour. She said, all right. She got in. She stayed in. She's been sleeping in it ever since. Whenever we're there in Pakistan in summer, she sleeps in the tent and she loves it. And she says, you know what? She says, this is like a dream for me because every time I sleep with an air conditioner, I wake up with itchy eyes and I'm really uncomfortable. But with close comfort, I don't get that problem. So, I didn't design it that way. It just worked out that way, and I've always, being an engineer, I've always, I was brought up to think, well, you can calculate the performance and so on and so forth. With air conditioning, the thing I've realized is that it's all so subjective. The feeling of comfort is something that is entirely subjective. You can't predict it mathematically. And although, we make a reasonable guess, but in terms of designing a little tiny air conditioner that would provide comfort, we've relied on trying it out with people. Do you feel comfortable? And luckily they do. Yeah. So it's really been a great experience we actually launched in Pakistan initially. And I'm sure if a business consultant, if I went to a business consultant and said, I want to start a new business, a new startup, and I want to launch the product first in Pakistan, they would have laughed.
But it all worked out for you.
We did, yes. So my wife and I were sitting in Lahore, where we have a home there, and initially we put all our air conditioners in the lounge and dining room. We filled it up entirely, and we looked at these boxes that we just brought from the factory in China. They make it to our design, you see. And I looked at her, and she looked at me, and we both said, because she's a professor of international relations, she said, well, Professor, what do we do now? Designing it was great. It took a few years, but we got it right. Making it was an adventure. Selling it, what do we do now? And her response was, pray. And it worked out. Wonderful people came into our lives, and we started. Amazingly, we sold them. Yes.
Wow.
A lot of prayer involved with all new ventures.
That's a word of advice for all startup founders. Prayer.
Yeah,
Pray.
Exactly. You do have to pray because look, when you're running a startup, and I call myself a young entrepreneur because I've had a long career, but most of it was not as an entrepreneur. So I call myself young and inexperienced, and yeah, you do have to say prayers all the time. You just don't know what's around the corner.
It's quite interesting, actually, even though this is one of your first few entrepreneurial ventures, you deal with a lot of unknowns. You're a pioneer in the robotics field. You're many times over. I mean, who thought about robots that early on in the Internet of Things, right? And I'm really curious, from the beginning, each time you venture out to do something and no one has attempted it, how do you deal with that?
Well, I have to say that, when it came to sheep shearing robots,
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
When I first heard of the idea, I laughed. I said, because I know about, Australian farmers, New Zealand farmers. We have lots of sheep in both countries. They're not the sort of people who buy robots. Well, somebody took me to a farm and showed me this machinery that these people have, $500,000 worth of machinery, which they use for 2 weeks a year to harvest wheat. And I said, oh, maybe they could afford robots. And then I learned that the wool industry in Australia at the time was $4 or $5 billion a year industry. And I said,
wow.
I think there's a future here. So the next thing was that, what I call the engineer's intuition. What should be possible? How should it work? What should it look like when it's working really well? And then I set about designing it to do that. And we had, again, that was a long struggle. I thought of it gliding across the sheep just like a shearer's hand.
Right.
But it took about 10 years to understand what that shearer was doing. And in the meantime, we actually had to learn to shear ourselves.
Because I did imagine something that was clamping the sheep down and rotating it like a rotisserie and going. The whole thing was that was the first thing that popped into my head when I saw.
Well, it's on YouTube. Robot sheep shearing. Have a look at it.
So
we're gonna pull the YouTube video out.
Yes, it's had hundreds of thousands of views. Yeah, so that was a fascinating experience. But look, it is about there's something about intuition, which essentially is sort of like is a built combination of tacit knowledge and experience. And you said, and each time I said, yeah, that should be possible. Actually, I have to give due credit to my graduate student at the time, Ken Taylor. We designed the tele robot. He came to me and he said, I want to invent a new kind of robot. You did sheep shearing robots. Tell me what to build.
Wow.
I said, that's really boring. I said, build, and he looked at me absolutely astonished, you see. And I said, I want you to answer this question. I want you to tell me why there are so few robots. Because in the 1970s, people had predicted there would be nobody working in factories by the mid-1990s. Can you imagine? You go into factories today, there's still lots of people, right? So people made these outrageous forecasts about robots, which didn't turn out to be true at all. People are still making forecasts about artificial intelligence. Right. But never mind, I smile. I call artificial intelligence artificial incompetence.
I was about to ask you about that, whether this is the same situation.
But having said that, I said, okay, go and figure out why there are so few robots. And then it was just at the time that the first Netscape browser was appearing. I'm sure you remember that, right? You're old enough to remember the first Netscape. It was so flaky, it would fall over every 10, 15 minutes. You'd have to reboot your computer and things like that. Yeah. So he showed me this thing, and he showed me this black rectangle on the screen. And he said, that's a coffee pot in Cambridge. I said, but it's black. I can't see anything. He said, yeah, that's because it's still the early hours of the morning there. And in half an hour, sure enough, the sun rose. This was about mid-afternoon our time. And the sun rose, and sure enough, we could see the coffee pot. And then all of a sudden, the pair of hands appeared, and the coffee went down. And he said, if people could see that coffee pot in Cambridge, they could see our robot in the lab, and then they could type in the coordinates to move it. Wow. And that was the origin of the idea. And I said, I want you to get a PhD. I don't want you to spend 10 years writing software. Right. He said, don't worry, I'll get all your other students, and we'll put it together, and we'll get it working in 6 weeks. And he did.
There's so many things that you've done, that you've accomplished in your life. And, sometimes I find myself some moments even having trouble getting up thinking of one thing. But it seems to me that when you get up in the morning, you seem to have so many thoughts in your mind. How do you even manage to do so much? Really, what gets you up in the morning?
Excitement.
Is it the excitement of life, the excitement of solving a problem?
I have been blessed. I really have to say I've been blessed. And, I do say prayers, but I definitely have been blessed with opportunities. With the sheep shearing robot, I just happened to be in the office at the right time when the telephone rang. Somebody said, could you help us? Wow. And they were actually looking for somebody else who wasn't around. And so I took the call. I said, yeah, I can do that. Thinking, oops, what have I said? But yeah, so it's a matter, I do tell my students, I said, whatever you do, make sure that you're never absolutely flat out. Always leave a bit of space so that when an opportunity presents itself, you can take the initial steps. Because you can never follow up an opportunity if you're absolutely flat out and busy. You have to give yourself a little bit of time to think and say, wow, that's an idea.
And that fate work is magic.
It's these things are not things that you can just throw 100% at straight away. You've got to think about it for a while. You've got to raise the finance. In fact, I always believe in following the need rather than struggling to raise the finance. And certainly with air conditioning, there I was presented with the need. 40 degrees at 3 o'clock in the morning.
That's some superb advice for all the entrepreneurs and all the self-starters out there.
Right. Yeah.
Because that really is the core of entrepreneurship, like seeking the need, not seeking just the funding.
Yes,
but,
absolutely.
And the thing is, with all these new ventures, we tend to start out underfunded, understaffed, undersupported. And, for you as an inventor and a businessman, how do you beat the odds that are against you? How do you view that, climbing that mountain?
Well, again, look, first of all, it starts with the need. Let me tell you, I was in Pakistan and I just brought the first prototype because my father-in-law was incredibly proud of this, wanted to show it to everybody. So as long as we had to keep it commercially secret, I couldn't take it to Pakistan. Right? So then I did, and I showed it to people and they were absolutely amazed. Getting into that tent is just such an incredible feeling of comfort when you crawl in from 40-degree heat and it feels like about 25 degrees. It just feels fantastic, So I showed it to people and the first thing they said is, how much would it cost? And I was completely unprepared for that question. I had no idea. So I luckily turned it around and said, how much would you pay for it? And the answer really astonished me. It was much more than I was expecting. And that was the moment I thought, what until then had been just a curiosity project, which I did with my students. I thought, wow, this could be commercial. So it's a question of experiencing the need and then asking that crucial question of the likely customer, how much would you pay for this?
That's your market research right there.
There's your market research, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'd been really privileged. I went to a conference in the US and listened to a guy called Paul Polak, who worked with Stanford University on their D School, which is a famous design school. So many of your listeners may have heard of it. And he came up with about 20 or 30 absolutely essential requirements for working not just on entrepreneurship, but working on something which was going to make a difference, particularly in low-income countries. I mean, this invention is targeted everywhere, from places like Singapore to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. He said, first of all, see the problem for yourself. See it and experience it. The second is, listen to the people when they explain their needs. Listening is crucial. Think and act big. And don't do anything if it's not going to benefit, if it's not going to benefit more than a million people, don't even think of it. All right? It's got to benefit millions and millions or hundreds of millions of people. Because then if it's answering their needs, they'll pay for it. So again, you're right. It's market research. And there's so many opportunities. Here in Singapore, we're sitting in the center of the world's biggest concentrations of people. Indonesia to the south, you've got China to the north in Southeast Asia, you've got India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. There's such huge opportunities. And people come together in a city like Singapore. So you get, the cultures mix, the ideas come together, the technology is here, the finance is here. Let's do something. But let's look beyond Singapore itself.
Yes. We're definitely going to keep this for the quick cuts, John.
Yeah, for
definitely going to keep this for the quick
Because there's a lot of people out there who want to start a business, but, they don't know where to start. And then I would always ask them that question as well. I said, well, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to achieve? I mean, if you're going to start off something with a thought of just, okay, I'm going to get that penthouse, on that on a beautiful island or somewhere, then you're never gonna reach your goal because you've not gone out and done enough work to find out what the needs of people are. The only thing that you know is your own need. That's the problem. And the need is always, I need to fill my pocket. That's the first thing that comes to mind. So nothing of substance ever comes out. Most of the time.
That's true. That's true.
No, you've got to start by meeting genuine people's needs, real people's needs. And I think the other thing I would really say is, think very carefully if you're in IT, because we're all told that the quantity of information is exploding, right? So the law of supply and demand tells you that the value must be vanishing to zero.
Right.
So that's why, being in robotics and artificial intelligence for so long, I said, no, you have to stick with real people's needs, physical needs. That's where needs start, physical needs, food, shelter, comfort. And when you experience trying to sleep at 40 degrees at night, I can tell you, air conditioning is a need. And we know from lots of studies now that it's a survival need. It is a survival need. With the warming climate, especially urbanization. And you think about it, there are great examples of what you call indigenous architecture. Buildings that were designed to be used in really hot conditions. And, particularly in Iran, the Middle East, they really were the specialists in this area. But in order to stay comfortable, you had to move around. You had to move from the top of the building where it would be comfortable in cold weather to the bottom of the building where it was comfortable in the really hot weather. But if you're in an apartment block in Chennai or in Ahmedabad in India, think about it. You can't just leave your apartment on the 36th floor and say, it's hot today, I'm going to go and live in the basement.
That's true.
Right? So we have to find solutions. And, we've got to... The exciting thing is here, we've got a technology which works in existing buildings, which can bring emissions down to near zero in existing buildings.
Wow.
And we've got to get those emissions down to zero by 2050 at the latest. Otherwise, we're going to be literally cooked. That's only 30 years away. So, and one of the really fascinating exercises I did was a review of technologies. And here it was all sorts of things in robotics, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. And the customer wanted to know what technologies were going to be around in 25 years' time. So to do that, we went back 25 years and reviewed about 180 technology announcements that were made in the 1980s. And we asked ourselves, what happened to them? It was fascinating. Google is an immensely powerful tool, and we use Google to find that about a third of them completely disappeared. About a third of them were forecast to be everywhere, but were further away than ever, like nuclear fusion power, right? And of the other third, what we found was that from the initial public demonstration to the time when they were really widespread, with very few exceptions, took 30 to 40 years, which was much longer than we thought. So if we want to fix the climate and get emissions down to zero in 30 years' time, we have to use the technologies we have at our hand now.
Right.
Maybe one or two will come along that might be really helpful, but we have to plan for using what we've got today, and we can do it. So, close comfort is going to be part of that solution in the air conditioning space, but not the only solution. There's some fabulous examples here in Singapore of some really forward thinking. The School of Environmental Design at National University of Singapore being designed near zero energy consumption. And what they've done is that they've torn up the idea of pumping in air at 15 degrees, which makes you freeze in most Singapore buildings, right? And they plan for the room air to be at 28 degrees, which you might say, well, isn't that going to be hot and sweaty?
Right.
Well, the answer is no. If you've got a ceiling fan and you reduce the humidity a bit, not nearly as much as you would normally, but just enough, you get a really comfortable environment. So far less energy. So for buildings with lots of people, yeah, go out there, have a look.
No, I would try it in my own home to bring down my $350-something bill.
You should be able to do it, but you, as you will see, it requires just a little bit more than turning down the thermostat.
Right.
Or turning up the thermostat. It's not quite so easy.
So, you know, these are all developing all these technologies, even developing close comfort took a long time. And I mean, it must be really hard. And the thing is that most people would be discouraged after the first few setbacks. So what do you have to say to people who feel that way when they start their own entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, you've just got to be prepared to stick at it, and you've got to have long-term finance. That's really, really important. If you're not going to give yourself hernia through tension, you've got to have long-term finance. It's going to take 2 or 3 times as long as you think. That's the thing. And you know, so many investors particularly have this idea that, you know, a company that's more than 3 years old is old, ancient. We're not interested. Well, you know, we're just getting into the run of things now and getting our marketing sorted out. And we were founded in 2007. That's how long it takes.
I think there are some really, really important bits of advice, because I think for a lot of people when they are starting out businesses and all that, somehow you need money to run. Money is the most important thing, but people don't think about it in the long term, that they need long-term financial sustainability.
Yes.
Moving on.
Find a way of doing it on a shoestring, you know, with the smell of an oily rag, because you're going to need that time and space to get it right.
Wow.
You know, look at James Dyson. You know, he's set up here in Singapore. You know, how many hundreds or thousands of prototypes he produces for each of the products that comes out the end. You know, it does take a lot of time, persistence, and effort. No question about it.
Time, persistence, and effort. That is the takeaway for all you listeners out there. Don't mind me asking this question, but how different, right, is was your initial idea, right, for the product? How different was it back then to what it is now?
It wasn't really very much different in principle, but of course, to get it working, to get it into a package which is commercially feasible, small enough, robust enough, so if it gets dropped, it doesn't break at the first attempt, is really tough. You know, and above all, I think probably the really interesting challenge has been to figure out how to change the way people think about air conditioning. You know, conventional air conditioning is really designed to keep the bricks cool. What a waste. I've never yet met a brick that wants to be cool. It doesn't care about the temperature, right? Only we worry about the temperature. So the trick was to think in terms, you know, how do we convince people to out of this idea that you have to keep the whole building or the whole room cool, because that's the thing that really chews up your electricity. Keeping those bricks cool. You want to keep bricks cool. Buy a normal AC, you know, and paint smiles on the wall. You're paying the bill.
But if you want to keep people cool, then get close comfort.
Get close comfort. We'll leave the link for that below in the description.
Yeah.
We cool people, not buildings.
I could be a lot cooler with a smaller electricity bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think what you could do with it.
Okay, Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, please check out Close Comfort. Just do a quick Google. You will see Close Comfort. We will definitely add the link in our description below. In the meanwhile,
stop donating money to the big power companies.
Yes, and in the meanwhile, like, subscribe, and share this video if you enjoyed this interview. This is Kenneth Lee.
Big John.
That's Big John, and we'll see you next time.